What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So I have a fun video today. It's not actually the technical breakdown of Charles versus Max, which I did promise would come either Tuesday or Wednesday. It will instead come tomorrow. I'm very excited for it. I think it's extremely good. I just don't have the time today to record and edit a video of that length, so it will instead come tomorrow. But the topic today is very fun because it's my suggestion for the UFC White House card. It's every fight. I made a list of 12 fights. You know, there could be more on there. I've heard some people say there might be less, actually. But in any case, this is like a reasonable, normal amount of fights for a card. And I'm going to go through every single one of them, you know, from curtain jerker to main event in the order that I would place them, that I think kind of would have the best pacing and everything and respects the name value of the different people and, you know, who realistically would or wouldn't be on the main card, for example. But this is the order I would go in. And I think I really cooked. I think you're going to hear this and be like, yeah, I can't think of a better card, you know, period, full stop. I think this is, I went through the roster. I looked at, like, you know, and I put some restrictions on myself. I actually didn't book anyone who is like some superstar who's not currently fighting. So Conor McGregor is not on here. Like the Diaz brothers are not on here. Jorge Masvidal is not on here. They could, of course, be. If the UFC can get any of them, fine. And they could fight each other, excuse me. You could have, you know, Conor versus Nate 3. You could have Conor versus Jorge. You could have Conor versus Stephen Thompson, like whatever. If you can get any of those guys, get them. But this card doesn't assume that the UFC gets any of those guys. Additionally, there's only 3 title fights on here. I think 3 is the right number because we've had several events in the past that had 3 title fights. So for an event of this magnitude not to have 3 feels kind of silly. But additionally, like, I don't think we need more than that because I'm seeing some people say like, what if they get like 6 title fights? And it's like, A, I just don't think that's actually the optimal way to build a great card. But B, and more importantly, that would just too greatly hinder the numbered events in the months leading up to and then after the White House card. Like it would just eat up too many of the champions, and we just can't have that. So, and there's no title fights in the women's divisions amongst those 3. It's three like pretty big like men's championship fights in the 3 title fights. So there's that. This is the order I would put it in, but you know, I think when you hear the title fights, you might assume the UFC might shuffle that order a bit. I think this is reasonable. This is how I would do it. I think this is the right pacing and everything. And there's some weird fights on here. I keep looking to my side because I have the list of fights. But this is an interesting mix of shit because I think people, when they're trying to make cards like this, they make the mistake of just trying to curate as many knockouts as possible or as many like fight of the night candidates as possible. And don't get me wrong, we've got a lot of that shit on here. There's not a dull fight on here. However, I think people don't realize that truly great cards kind of have a mix of everything. Like they have knockouts, they have wars, they have some grappling, it's not all striking. They have weird shit where like people get hurt or disqualified. By hurt, I mean like injuries ending fights. And obviously you can't like cause those things to happen. But my point is like great cards have a bit of everything. They have the agony and they have the ecstasy. You know, you have the old guard, you know, defeating like the up-and-comers, and you have the up-and-comers defeating the old guard. Like you have number 1 contenders fights. You just have like a mix of everything, and it culminates in some great fight. Typically, like when I think of the greatest cards of all time, that's how they went. It wasn't just action fight, or knockout, you know, for the whole thing. Because at that point, it becomes similar to if you had your favorite dessert, but you just ate portion after portion of it for like 2 hours straight. Like you'd get sick of it. Like you need some variety. Like a proper meal isn't structured that way. And I don't think this card should be structured that way. So that's how this is going to work. These are all reasonable matchups. So like as far as I'm aware, none of these guys are currently booked in fights. And there's a couple examples of fighters from other promotions coming over, but I think they're all reasonable acquisitions. I think the UFC could get these guys without too much money, and I think these matchups are fun. We've got some old guys, we've got young guys, we've got people fighting across like different weight classes. I think this is a fucking like perfect card. Okay, so with all that covered, let's begin. So for me, I would have the curtain jerker. I would have the first early prelim fight be Benoit Saint Denis versus Manuel Torres. This is a good kind of placeholder fight for Saint Denis. He's kind of approaching title contention. It's a good opportunity for Torres. It would be an exciting fight. It may tie into the rest of the card, as I alluded to. That's the opener. Like, that's just to get us going. That's the first thing. Decent name value. Like, it's not such name value that people are going to complain. Like, how is this guy on the early prelims of a card like this? Because I did factor that in. There's certain people here where it's like, I just know they would put this person on the main card. There's no fucking way they're putting them on the prelims. But this is a reasonable one. I don't think anyone would complain too much. Next. So first one, Saint Denis Torres. Next, Josh Emmett versus Michael Chandler at lightweight. So here we've got two old guys, two powerhouses, two like athletic specimens, boxer, like power puncher wrestler types, up at lightweight. To me, this is perfect. Like what else do you do with Michael Chandler at this point? Like, I think even if they somehow get McGregor to come over, they're not going to do Chandler McGregor. So what else do you do? And what do you do with Josh Emmett? I mean, he's been around forever. He's on the decline. He's progressively dropped in the rankings. To me, this is the perfect mirror match. Okay, and like guaranteed fireworks. What's that to like? And again, they're both on enough of a decline, and neither of them are so big of names that it's like unreasonable for them to be this low on a card like this. So that's that. We'll call that like the two opening early prelims. Excuse me, it's kind of cold in here. Gotta sip my coffee. So going on to like the main prelims, I've got Michael Venom Page versus Jared Cannonier at middleweight. So two strikers of different styles, such that I think it would be very difficult for this to be too boring of a fight. We'd get to see the reach and size of Jared Cannonier sort of try to impose itself on the distance management of MVP. And I just wanted MVP on this card because he is weird. He is like a freak show kind of fight. Like, this is the kind of shit you need to add some variety, to add some flavor to a card like this. And even if it's kind of boring, like even if it's not a banger, even if MVP doesn't get the knockout, like, it'll be fun to watch, and it'll be tense, and it'll be weird. Like, this is a good first, like, main prelim card kind of fight. Moving on, we've got Robert Whittaker making his light heavyweight debut, his long-awaited light heavyweight debut. He's been talking about doing this for years. He's been talking about doing it recently. He is going to make his debut at 205 against Khalil Roundtree. Okay? Get some good striking. We'll see if Whittaker can like mix in his wrestling. It should be exciting. Like, Khalil Roundtree is so reliable in that way. And Khalil is not that big. Like, I feel like Whittaker can struggle against guys who have like very clear like height and reach advantages over him. And Khalil will be bigger, but he's not like 6'6" or something. You know what I mean? So it's like, to me, it's like a good size matchup as well as a fun stylistic matchup. And for two guys, Whittaker, he's not going to fight for a belt at middleweight. We'll see what he can do at light heavyweight. Khalil is not currently knocking on the door of a title shot at light heavyweight. So this is a good, placeholder match for him too. I think this is a very fun fight. Moving on, at featherweight, we have Aljamain Sterling versus Crone Gracie. I like the idea of an event like this having a Gracie on it, just hearkening back to the history of the UFC and of the sport. And this will be silly. Like I want to see Crone Gracie like either just get the shit beat out of him on the feet by Aljamain Sterling, which will be funny, or I want to see like Crone jump guard on Aljamain Sterling, and I want to see what happens. Like, I want to see the goofy grappling that might ensue from this fight. And, what are you going to do with Sterling? He's kind of approaching a title shot at featherweight, but there's a logjam in that division because you've got Murphy, you've got Evloev. They wasted time giving a fucking rematch title shot to Diego Lopez. Sterling needs something to do. This is a good way to stay active and keep his name in the news and whatnot. Big card. He is a name. He is a figure in the sport. He was a great champion, kind of an underrated champion. Like, he's the kind of guy who belongs on a card like this. He adds name value, and we're putting him into a freaky, goofy fight. So, and again, it's a fight that varies it up a little. Like, you could easily see, Josh Emmett and Chandler, being a war and having a knockout. You could see Whitaker and Roundtree being a war and having a knockout. You need something goofy like this to kind of shake that up a little. So, moving on. Michael Morales versus Kamaru Usman. So this is a real like shit or get off the pot moment for Usman. He got to prove that he still has it against the young guys when he beat Buckley. And Buckley was, kind of a similar thing where it's like people thought Buckley had good takedown defense, very athletic, good scrambles, and was going to be fucking dangerous on the feet. And Usman was able to shut him down and use his wrestling. Let's see if he can do that to an even more difficult version of that matchup with Morales. And if he can do that, then Usman deserves a fucking title shot. And for Morales, this is just a good chance for him to get another win, like take out the old guard. This, again, might tie into something else later. But I think this is a very solid fight. And then moving on to the featured prelim, so like the main event of the prelims. We have Corey Sandhagen versus Sean O'Malley. Okay, we need to see this fight. This fight has been this fight is overdue, and frankly, like both these guys need something right now because Sandhagen looked good despite that one very terrible round, but he looked good against Merab, and O'Malley rebounded with his win against Yadong, but we can't give him a title shot just off of that. So this is like what both guys need. It's a fresh matchup, and it would be exciting. Like this is like the kind of fight that I think most people would fill a card like this with, where you're just guaranteed, more or less guaranteed. I mean, you never know because, of course, like O'Malley's fight with Yadong wasn't actually that exciting, but it was pretty good. But wasn't actually that exciting despite the fact that when you've got two bantamweight strikers like that who are top 10, you should just expect fireworks. But nevertheless, this one I think would be almost guaranteed action, almost guaranteed style points, guaranteed aesthetically pleasing fight in the sense that they would actually be doing slick moves, they'd be mixing in the punches, the kicks, the knees, the spins, everything. Like, this is a great fight. This is a good, kind of send off for the prelims to transition into the main card, I think. Which, for that, this one is going to throw some of you off, I think. And this is our first of two sort of imports from other organizations. I have Kleber Koike Erbst, and before I even announce his opponent, let me tell you about him. If you watched some of my previous videos about action fighters and about like fights we never got to see and whatnot, I have talked about this guy before. This guy fights in Ryzen. He has a very strange name. It's, if people need to, I can like write it in the description. But it's Kleber Koike Erbst. He is, I think, like German and Japanese, and he's like born in Brazil, and that's why his name is like that. But this guy is one of the greatest submission artists in the history of the sport. I forget the details, but if you look at his record, he's got like over 30 wins and like 29 of them are submissions or something like that. It's a ratio of submissions. Yeah, like the ratio of his wins that are submissions is higher than like Charles Oliveira. It's higher than Shinya Aoki. Like, he is the submission guy. And on the feet, he is just totally down to scrap. He's sloppy. He gets hit a lot. He loses sometimes. He doesn't have a perfect record or anything. But he is just down to scrap. He's got that sort of shoot-a-box style that way. He might even train there. I'm not sure. But it has the flavor of like a Charles Oliveira or like a Fabricio Verdum when he was in his prime, where he's this submission guy who has like this Brazilian Muay Thai striking style, and it's just down to throw. And he's willing to flop to his back, if he needs to. He's willing to jump guard and shit like that. And his submissions are gnarly. I've seen him injure dudes. I've seen him break limbs. And he'll submit you any which way. Like, he's got a million different kinds of chokes, arm locks, leg locks, like everything under the sun. He's just pure action. And it's a shame that we've never gotten to see him in the UFC. So we've got him making his UFC debut. Kleber Koike Erbst going up to lightweight to make his debut against Paddy Pimblett. Like, I said in the past that Patty doesn't have a lot of good matchups because he revealed his, his deficiencies against Gaethje. And I basically said, like, look, like, who do you give Patty to? He's probably never fighting for a belt. He's just not that good. I'm not honestly convinced I could pick him against anyone in the top 15. What do you do except just give him other old guys like a Jim Miller or something? And I found the solution. The solution is you bring over Clever Kawike Erbst from Ryzen. You bring him over. He typically fights at featherweight. You bring him over. He goes up to lightweight, fights Patty. Think of how he described Kawike's style, and think of how Patty fights as this scrappy, sloppy, willing to throw down jiu-jitsu guy. This is a match made in heaven, okay? I'm extremely pleased with this matchup. Moving on, at heavyweight, we have Alexander Volkov, against former one champion Anatoly Malikin, also coming over, also making his UFC debut. And I say former because he was I think he was the light heavyweight and heavyweight champion. He actually fought RDR, I think, in both weight classes and beat him both times. But in any case, he's like this stocky powerhouse heavyweight. And he lost his last fight, so he's not the current champion. So I feel like he'd be a somewhat easy acquisition. It's not like they're bringing over a champion from one or from Ryzen. And I think so you get that intrigue. I think it would be an exciting fight between him and Volkov. The striking would be fun. It'd be fun to watch like the stocky, short powerhouse guy have to manage the distance of a Volkov. And again, this might tie into a fight that's coming up here, because the next fight on the main event and the first of the title fights would be Alex Pereira making his heavyweight debut against either Tom or Cyril Gane. Now, ideally it would be against Tom, and I know it's not perfect in the sense that we would want to see Tom settle this shit with Cyril before he fights Alex Pereira. I get that. But if Tom is healthy, like, you need Alex on a card like this, and it should be for the belt. If Tom's available, it should be against him. Cyril can fucking wait, If Tom is not available, then it should be against Cyril. It should be Alex Pereira versus Cyril Gane, and it should be for the interim belt. Okay, which is part of why it's third on the list, because typically, if there's multiple title fights on a card, typically the heaviest fight is the main event, or the heavier fight is the main event. So if you had the middleweight title and the light heavyweight title on the same card, typically the light heavyweight title would be the main event, the middleweight would be the co-main event. I'm not doing that, because this could potentially be for an interim belt. It could potentially be Alex versus Cyril for an interim belt, so you can't place that over actual fucking titles. And B, I think the people ahead of him in these title fights are maybe bigger stars. I don't know the metrics, the UFC would know. But B, it just would be better fights. So I think, in any case, this is the right order. But I have, again, Pereira versus either Tom or Cyril, and that's the first of 3 title fights. The next title fight, in the co-main event, would be Ilia Topuria versus Justin Gaethje. We need this. Gaethje is the interim champ. They're clearly not going to give it to Arman, so what do? We get Ilia back. We've got a banger. We've got an old name in Justin. That shit sells itself. I don't need to elaborate on that. And then in the main event, at welterweight, we have Islam Makhachev defending his belt against Ian Gary. Okay? I have said, many times, and I think the kind of consensus amongst the hardcores at least, is that both Islam and Ilia should defend their belts before they fight each other, and Islam should not be defending his belt against someone like Kamaru Usman. He should be defending it against one of the top contenders, and if it's not going to be Shavkat, it should be Ian Gary. Okay? I think that is the fight to make. Ian Gary annoys me too, I get it. But that is the fight to make stylistically. That is a very intriguing fight. That is a more compelling matchup than is Gaethje versus Topuria. It is the rightful main event. And again, like I said, we have fights for the fill-ins. So we have Islam Makhachev versus Ian Gary in the main event. We have Michael Morales versus Kamaru Usman on the prelims. Either one of those fucking guys can step in if Gary gets injured or something. And if the champion gets injured, then we can do some deck shuffling. We might change who fights whom and whatever, and we might change like, okay, well that was the main event. Now it's just on the prelims or something. But that's another benefit to having 3 title fights, is you have room for like one of them to fall out. And it's another benefit to not relying on people like Conor McGregor or John Jones or whoever the fuck, because you can't trust those people to turn up either. So like, it just makes me think of UFC 200, where that card started out fucking nuts, and it was still pretty good when all was said and done, but there was a lot of falling out. There was a lot of deck shuffling. They had to get Cormier versus Anderson Silva on short notice. It was going to be Cormier versus Jones too, and that didn't happen. And, the card was good and whatever, but it was fucking headlined, if I recall correctly, wasn't it headlined by like Miesha Tate versus Holly Holm? or something silly like that, or what, like it was something like that. And it was just like, this shouldn't be what's happening. So this way, with this card, like, if Islam versus Gary doesn't work out, make fucking Ilya versus Gaethje the main event. If somehow both of those don't work, like, make Alex Pereira the main event. Like, this is totally manageable. And again, you just have fill-ins, because we've got Topuria and Gaethje. We have in the opening fight Benoit Saint-Denis versus Manuel Torres. Like, have Benoit Saint-Denis fill in for Gaethje if Gaethje gets hurt. Boom. And people could say, like, we'll have Arman on the card, and I'd be for that, but I just don't feel like the UFC would do that. I don't feel like the UFC is going to give Arman that opportunity. I feel like, I would like them to. I would like him to just be fighting Ilya, but just realistically, I don't think they'll do that. So I picked someone who, I feel like, someone, people would be more willing to fight on short notice, because no one's going to want to fight Arman on short notice. No one's going to want to fight him on a day's notice because the other person got hurt or something. And Benoit Saint-Denis is an exciting fighter, so people will be down to watch it. And then, the third title fight, Pereira versus Tom or Surreal, we've got Volkov versus Malakin. So, like, so Volkov can fill in. This is, I think, well structured, and we've kept it to a minimum as far as, like, yes, we have Volkov Malakin, which is a heavyweight fight. Heavyweight fights kind of suck, to be real. But this is a good fight, I think. Likewise, we've got one light heavyweight fight on here, which is Whitaker versus Roundtree, but I think that would be good. I think that, that would be hard to be shitty. And we have a middleweight fight on here with MVP versus Cannonier, but again, I just can't imagine that not being at least amusing and intriguing. So, like, typically you don't want to put a lot of the heavier divisions on a card like this. You want to use the lighter divisions. You want bantamweights, featherweights, lightweights, because they more frequently guarantee excitement and action, and not like sloppy horse shit. However, I think this is well done. I think this is a good use of the name value. This adds intrigue. You've got people coming over. You've got goofy shit no one would anticipate, like Herbst versus Pimlet. I think this is perfect. I think this is better than the card we're going to get. like, I don't know what we're going to get, but I think this is better than whatever that's going to be. And again, this was done in such a way, we didn't just chew up all of our contenders. We still have Arman, we still have Evloev, we've still got other champions. We'll have whoever the flyweight champion is. We'll have Peter Yan, we'll have Volkanovski, we'll have Khamzat. Like, we'll have all of the female champions. Like, we'll have shit to put in the other cards before and after the White House event. And again, I don't think any of these guys, to my knowledge, are booked currently. So this is kind of perfect, I think. And I'll, just to reiterate, I will list it from the curtain jerker to the main event one more time. Benoit Saint-Denis versus Manuel Torres. Josh Emmett versus Michael Chandler at lightweight. Michael Venom Page versus Jared Cannonier at middleweight. Robert Whitaker versus Khalil Roundtree at light heavyweight. Aljamain Sterling versus Crone Gracie. Michael Morales versus Kamaru Usman. Corey Sandhagen versus Sean O'Malley. And then entering the main card, Kleber Koike Herbst versus Paddy Pimblett at lightweight. Alexander Volkov versus Anatoly Malakin. Alex Pereira versus either Tom Aspinall or Cyril Gane. Ilya Topuria versus Justin Gaethje. And Islam Makhachev versus Ian Gary. You can't ask for better than that.